Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Sony CyberShot RX100 Mark VII, $1,200 US, just launched, and its brethren, the RX10 Mark IV, which I'm hoping a Mark V is around the corner because I love this camera. And that's not to say I don't love this camera, but I'm just starting to get to know it. We're not, exactly there yet in our relationship. But of course, anyone who follows my channel does know that historically, I love the RX100. And there's a very good reason. You simply aren't going to put a better camera in your pocket. And I don't mean just stills. I mean video, I mean the whole kit and caboodle. The EVF, the whole deal. This thing is a little monster. And it does so much more now than it used to because it's got an autofocus system that the RX10 right here is probably going to get in the Mark V. So, while this review might end up dated as quickly as we get the Mark V, as that comes out, let's stick with what we've got in the world today. So, the reason I'm comparing these two, and I'll also get to how they complement one another, is because they do share a lot in common, even though their form factor is not similar at all. They both have an incredibly similar 1-inch sensor. They both have fixed lenses, of course, 200mm reach here, 600mm reach here, which I, of course, prefer the 600mm reach on the RX10 because that does give you more flexibility. Neither has an incredibly fast piece of glass, no ND filter up in here, but both of them do shoot great 4K video, both do HFR. You want some slow-mo video, you've got it. Both have steady shot, but this one has active steady shot in 4K, which is kind of a big deal. I mean, that means if you want to walk and talk and shoot, you can without using a gimbal. Here, you better have a gimbal because regular steady shot isn't very steady. And that's coming from a guy named Eddie. Again, not trying to be cute. I'm just running with things. So, what can you do with this that you can't with this? Well, I've mentioned the active steady shot in 4K. So if we were to take away the fact, if this was limited to 200mm, which the irony is that the very first RX10 that I covered was, of course, it did have a very fast, beautiful lens that was done away with for a longer lens. Are you seeing a trend yet, everybody? Sony is continuing to give us longer lenses. There's a reason. It's because as every new phone, like this Note 10 Plus, comes out, cameras with no reach become kind of a thing of the past. So what do people look to cameras for today? It's to accomplish things that their phones can't, and that's what both of these can do. 200, 600mm, but if I were to compare them side by side, and let's go back in time, like I was saying, and go back to the very first RX10, which was limited to a 200mm lens, and let's say it also shot 4K, would it have the active steady shot? The answer is no. No camera right now has that active steady shot. Now, another thing that makes this comparison more reasonable than ever before is that for the very first time, the RX100 line has a microphone jack. Okay? Now, it doesn't have a headphone jack. This does, but it has a mic jack. So even though we don't have a way to monitor our audio, we do have a way of inserting it. And that's a pretty big deal for a camera that can fit in a large pocket. I'm not going to pretend this is fitting in your jean pocket, especially if you wear skinny jeans. I don't, but if you do, good luck to you, my friend. You're not getting that thing in your pocket. So while I call this pocketable, that's because it is pocketable, but it's better off in your other half's pocketbook. That tends to be the case with me. Because I really can't fit it in my pants without it looking strange, if that makes any sense. Like I have a bulge where I shouldn't. At any rate, this camera, on the other hand, this is a bulge, right? I mean, we're talking about a bridge style. So here we're basically targeting people who aren't interested in a digital SLR or having to figure out which lens is right for what they're shooting. And I understand that completely because this is a camera that can do just about anything. Its limitation, of course, is in its 1-inch sensor. It does have phase and contrast, hybrid autofocus, much like the RX100. In fact, it borrows the system that started with the RX100 Mark V. That's when they introduced, and I predicted that back when I covered the RX100 Mark V, that we would likely see that autofocus system make its way into the RX10 Mark IV. And that's exactly what happened. So it's a pretty safe assumption that whatever has come to life here in the RX100 Mark VII will probably be coming to the RX10 Mark V. So that's why I said at the top of the video, when the RX10 Mark V gets announced, it's probably going to render this comparison slightly obsolete, but not really, because these can still be complementary. You can save yourself some money, get the RX10 Mark IV for what it's made for, which is that extra reach, and stick to this sucker for the benefits that it has that this doesn't. Now, the mic jack is not one of them. As I said, this has all of that. The active steady shot on here is. The autofocus system on here is. But, of course, if you're really after the full 600mm reach and the Mark V ends up bringing this autofocus system, you're not going to want to even consider this unless you absolutely want it to be pocketable. Now, I am a fan of that, and I'm pretty much sold on this so far. I don't have a reason to not want it. Even having the Mark VI, the active steady shot is a complete game changer for video. The video isn't as clean, and it's cropped, so you're losing some of the frame, but you don't need a gimbal. That's huge. And then the other thing is overheating. Now, you won't have any video overheating here. The RX100 line historically is a video overheating machine. That's why it's capped at 5 minutes with 4K. But now we can play with the threshold. That makes a big difference. Of course, here we also have an LCD screen that will flip all the way around for self-framing. You're never doing that with an RX10. So that's why I see these as very good travel companions. I mean, if you're going on a trip, if you have these two, you really can't go wrong. Now, that doesn't mean if you have these two, you'll go wrong either. In comes the RX100 Mark V. But I'd rather have this camera, and that's because it's just going to give you more flexibility overall, which I think is important if you care about the big picture. And I'm not trying to be cute with the picture thing either. It's just the truth. If you are really trying to have, you know, a photographic tool to go with you everywhere, and then one that is dedicated for tourism and specific shots, architectural detail, things that you aren't going to be able to get with the 200mm reach. That's where, you know, wildlife, that's where the RX10 lineup shines. And I'm sure with the improved autofocus system of the Mark VII, which I'm telling you, it's gonna come here, folks. I don't have any inside info. It's just using a brain and looking at history. And once that autofocus system is on board the RX10 Mark V, that's going to be the best bridge camera ever made. But as it stands right now, the Mark IV still is. And what I should have said at the beginning of the video is that these are so close in price that I feel anyone who wants a point-and-shoot camera and walks into a store, they should know which one they want. I mean, you either want something that's pretty big or fairly small. However, if you put this in front of someone and say, oh, this is $1,200 and this is, you know, $1,500, and it's only going to go down. I think right now it's like $1,600, but it could be $1,500. It depends what kind of deals are going on. And I'm sure once the Mark V comes out, which I'm confident it will, I hope I'm not wrong about that because I would like it. I'm looking forward to getting it. Sony, please, if you're listening, confirm this stuff already. Then it's going to be a difficult decision for someone looking at these two cameras and saying, you know, they're almost the same price. This one can do so much. This one can't do as much, it doesn't seem. Well, that argument isn't quite right, because based on what I've told you about the Mark VII, it actually can do more than the RX10 Mark IV. It just doesn't have the telephoto reach, and it doesn't have a headphone jack and a little screen here for readout. So otherwise, it can do more than the RX10 Mark IV, as long as we're talking about stopping the lens at the 200mm reach. So that's an important point to make. I do also prefer the EVF on the RX10 lineup because it's not a little mini baby EVF, but better to have a mini baby EVF that pops out than none at all. Battery life isn't amazing on either of them. Very similar, actually. So that's another thing, even though, you know, one uses a W series, the other one is the BPX. they still don't have amazing battery life, either of them. And they're both point-and-shoot cameras. That's what you got to remember with a 1-inch sensor. When I hear people say, well, 1-inch sensor isn't much larger than what's in my phone, yeah, it is. It is still considerably larger. And the dynamic range that you can get out of both of these cameras craps on smartphones. Low light capability on both of these, not amazing. But that's not what you're buying them for. Will they outperform phones? Most. I mean, especially if they're used properly, correctly. No question about it. So let's not talk about the smartphones. I just keep bringing it up because I hear it so much that people are trying to see if they're going to make me have a conniption fit. What it comes down to is that, if you're trying to decide between these, it really should boil down to form factor, which is the most obvious thing when you look at them immediately. Do you want to have something that will go anywhere, and so you'll have to carry some extra batteries and it's lightweight? Or do you want something that you'll need a camera bag for? But you still won't need a camera bag that is going to have, a dedicated camera bag in the sense that you need to carry lenses and a multitude of other accessories, because this is still an all-in-one in the same way that the RX100 is an all-in-one. And then when I get to traveling together, as I mentioned earlier, these are a perfect pairing right now because they both can kind of do what the other cannot. Go anywhere. Now, if I'm scuba diving, this is going to be the camera with the overheating threshold adjusted. The active steady shot. I'm not going to, even if this had a fully tilting screen that could flip around, I'm not going to walk around filming myself with an RX10 that has the same fidelity when it comes to video as an RX100. I mean, this is the lightweight, easy, already has the flip around 180-degree screen to frame myself. So it's really a matter of, I think they're complementary. Of course, if you buy both of these, you could be buying an A7R Mark III with a nice piece of glass. But then we're going down a rabbit hole to a whole nother realm of photography where point and shoot doesn't live. Now, for professionals, of course, point and shoot is still a thing, and that's why the RX100 was everything to begin with, because pros were like, oh my God, $500, yeah, it's a lot of money for a point and shoot camera, but has anyone seen what this thing could do? And here we are in the 7th gen, and nobody matches it. I mean, Canon, yeah, you come close with a bulky thing, but not close enough. And everyone who complains about the ergonomics and, the fact that you still have to buy the rubber grip, give me a break. I mean, I don't work for Sony. They've never given me one penny, and I understand the complaint, but seriously, just buy the rubber grip. Could Sony include it? Sure they could. Do they need to? No, because nobody competes with this. There's no direct competitor. There is no pocket camera that does everything this does. In the same way, there's no bridge style camera that does everything this does. So when you've got that kind of capability at your fingertips, you don't need to make it perfect. First of all, that's never going to happen. And second of all, you're never going to please everybody. Boy, do I know it. All you got to do is look at some of my comments. Look at feedback in forums. People will find a way to complain about everything. And you know why? It's because complaining is easy. It's a lot easier than anything else probably in life. But when it comes to comparing these two, again, if I had to pick between the two of them right now, I would take the RX100. And that's because in terms of what they've added to it, not talking about the microphone input, don't really care that much about it, but everything else, they have made it probably the most complete point-and-shoot camera ever. But I will also say that as soon as the Mark V comes out, and I've already said this several times, and they give it the same benefits we've gotten here, that doesn't apply to the overheating issue because that's not an issue, but the active steady shot, the autofocus system, I'm going to be telling you that the RX10 Mark V is the best point-and-shoot camera on the market. Now, granted, completely different profiles, bridge style, pocket style, but that's where I'll probably flip. And if the 5 has all of the capability that the RX100 Mark VII has, and you say to me, Ed, you got to pick one, man. You don't get to take both. I'll be going with the RX10 Mark V because if it has all of the flexibility of the 100, but is in this form factor, I still would rather, I'll feel and know that it's a more complete photographic and video tool than this guy. And this guy's really all about its form factor. So that, for many of you, is going to be the more important feature. That is going to be the thing that drives your decision to purchase the RX100. And I completely respect it because the best camera is the one that you have with you, right? And pocketability makes the RX100 travel everywhere. And that's why they still make, I'm pretty sure, every generation of this camera still. I mean, you can go pick up an RX100 Mark I for like 300 and change. And you'll get amazing stills out of it with contrast, autofocus and no EVF and no 4K video. And, it's still a great camera. Still a lot better than your average smartphone or even top-of-the-line smartphone. But that pretty much sums things up. I mean, these are two great cameras. If I had to spend the money right now, it would be on the RX100 unless you are specifically out there to have that 600 millimeter range, which is the premise here. But as soon as that 5 comes out with all of these features, then you gotta be picking the RX100 only because of its form factor, because the Mark V RX10 will be a killer point and shoot, one device wonder where you don't need anything else. You really don't. Unless you're trying to do like a film production, you'll need an external monitor. You'll need an external microphone. But otherwise, it will have everything that you could ever want. The RX100 right now has everything you could ever want in a pocketable camera. So that makes it today's winner. Doesn't mean it will be tomorrow's. Although I gotta admit, I don't travel without an RX100. Forget about Amex. Don't leave home without it because you don't really need much more than this. The average consumer all the way up to pros, ever since they made the lens longer. When the lens was shorter, you needed other stuff. And the same applies to this. You don't really need to have an A7R Mark III with you if you're not going to have, a G Master 400 millimeter lens to throw on. Yeah, you've got the extra resolution, you can crop, you can do all that, but there's always a trade-off, right? And that's the beauty of this camera. So, and the 1-inch sensor on both of these is good enough for just about anything. That's what I love about both cameras and continue to love about Sony's RX, lineup. I just hope they bring us an RX1 Mark III. Please do it. Please, 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 please. That would be the one camera for me. Bring us internal 4K on there and that new 61 megapixel sensor. And this autofocus system, bring it over. Let's do it. Otherwise, would I like 10-bit? Yeah, sure I would. But both of these are great. You're not going to go wrong. But in my opinion right now, the RX100 Mark VII is the camera to beat because it has that real-time autofocus and the active steady shot for 4K and already phenomenal still performance, which I'm just amazed by what this thing's able to capture. RX10 Mark IV, still the best bridge camera, but as soon as that Mark V gets announced, well, I think I've said it enough times. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.